Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So I find the whole what if idea very interesting, very entertaining. Whether that be, politics, world wars, etc., conflicts, and even boxing. And boxing is littered with what if stories. If fighters' careers weren't cut short for whatever reason, how would they have done? I think the most notable example would be Salvador Sanchez, who passed away at 23 years old due to a car crash. And at 23 years old, he'd already beaten guys like Juan Laporte, Wilfredo Gomez, Azuma Nelson, Danny Lopez. So he was already on his way to becoming an absolute superstar in the sport of boxing. And even though he passed away at 23, even now he's considered an all-time great featherweight. But there's been other what-ifs in boxing, even in more recent years. Edwin Valero being a very good example. Valero, power-punching, brawling Venezuelan, two-weight world champion, won a belt at super featherweight. Also, of course, won the WBC lightweight title. Valero, who passed away in 2010, was on the verge of massive fights, potential fights with the likes of Manny Pacquiao, Juan Manuel Marquez, etc. Of course, we know what happened with Edwin Valero, killed his wife, then took his own life. And of course, we had Dmitry Pirog. Dmitry Pirog, Russian middleweight, who won a world title back in, 2010, I guess, around those times, 2011. Most notable for knocking out Daniel Jacobs when he won that WBO middleweight title, and after that fight he was expected to go on to do big things, had a herky-jerky style, power, good boxing skills, good speed, etc., great athleticism. He was supposed to fight Gennady Golovkin in 2012, or 2013. That fight never happened because of a serious back injury, and Pirog was never seen in the ring again. So boxing's been littered with what-if stories, but one of my favourite what-if stories would be Ike Ibeabuchi. Ike Ibeabuchi was a Nigerian heavyweight who amassed a record of 20-0 with 15 knockouts during the 1990s. Most notably, he stopped Chris Bird, who went on to become a heavyweight champion. He outpointed David Tua in a grueling fight. David Tua was a top heavyweight contender for many, many years. So in those two fights alone, he proved he was at a certain level. He'd certainly announced himself as a contender when he had his last fight in March of 1999 when he knocked out Chris Bird. I think that really cemented him as a heavyweight contender, and he proved in those two fights with Tua and Bird he was at a certain level, like I said. But the shame for me, and I do think Ibeabuchi was talented, but the shame for me was the fact that he had a very exciting style. Ibeabuchi was aggressive, he threw punches in bunches, pretty decent punching power, he could swarm you, and stylistically, if I had to say he reminded me of anybody, he reminded me a little of Holyfield. But the difference was I felt that Ibeabuchi was a bit more explosive, maybe carried more power. I'd say he did carry more power. And I'm not sitting here saying Ibeabuchi would have been like the next coming of Christ, or an all-time great heavyweight. But, he'd announced himself by the late 90s, and if you look at the heavyweight division in the late 90s and early 2000s, you look at some of the belt holders, I'm pretty convinced that it would have been a sure thing that Ibeabuchi would have got hold of at least one title. Maybe he'd have been a belt holder, but I'm certain he'd have been a champion of some description. Because you had guys like in the early 2000s, the late 90s, in that time period, up to the mid-2000s, because at the time of Ibeabuchi's last fight, he was only 26 years old. That was 1999, so Ibeabuchi would have continued through the 2000s. There's no doubt. And you look at some of the champions who were around back then. So Chris Bird, who was a good fighter, I'm not trying to discredit Chris Bird, but we saw what Ibeabuchi did to him. You had guys like Oleg Maskayev, guys like Samuel Peter, Lemon Brewster, Hashim Rahman, John Ruiz, etc. We had these sort of guys as champions There's no doubt in my mind that all those guys I mentioned, Ibeabuchi was more talented than all of those guys I mentioned. And you look at the late 90s, even the premier heavyweights, I think he would have lost to Lennox Lewis, to be honest. I think stylistically that would have been a hard fight for him. But you're looking at an old Mike Tyson in the late 90s. I think Ibeabuchi would have beaten Tyson in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think he would have beaten Holyfield in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I think he would have beaten the champions that I listed off. You know, guys like John Ruiz, Chris Bird in a rematch, even a guy like Herbie Hyde, you know. These are the sort of guys who had belts. Hakeem Rahman. I think he'd beat these guys. Even a young Vladimir Klitschko back then was, prior to Emmanuel Stewart, was very beatable, as we know. I think Klitschko after Stewart would be a nightmare for Ibeabuchi. But pre-Emmanuel Stewart, I think Ibeabuchi is a nightmare for Klitschko. Vitali, on the other hand, I think is a stylistically bad fight for Ibeabuchi. But my point being, I think he would have been a very good heavyweight and he would have been a champion. Of course, though, in 1999, Ibeabuchi, encountered a lot of legal problems. There was a moment where he kidnapped the 15-year-old son of his girlfriend. He took the son, drove him around and smashed the car into the side of a bridge, I believe. Had to pay a $500,000 settlement. And of course, after that, there was another moment where he actually got imprisoned. Had an escort sent to his room in Vegas. He allegedly, let's say, conducted himself poorly. He was arrested, he was imprisoned, and eventually deported many years later. Now, there's been talks of an Ike Ibeabuchi comeback for a long, long time. He first got released in 2014, actually got rearrested a couple of years later, I think due to a parole violation or something like that. Then he was deported. I think it went like that. But upon his initial release, he was in talks with Manny Pacquiao's advisor, Mike Conks, to make a comeback. And Top Rank was showing an interest. Back then, Ibeabuchi was 41 years old. And there were rumours he was going to fight on the undercard of, may have been Pacquiao Bradley or Pacquiao Algieri, one of those two fights. And there were talks he was coming back. And the rumoured opponent at the time, I remember this vividly, was Andy Ruiz. Of course, Andy Ruiz back then was a heavyweight prospect under Top Rank. That was the talk going around the town, but for whatever reason, it never transpired. Ike Ibeabuchi then got into more legal trouble, and I think now he's been deported. But, on the day of the election in America, we will talk about the president, Ike Ibeabuchi's new comeback attempt. He's actually got a fight scheduled in Nigeria for the 7th of December. And he's scheduled to fight a guy called Ayman Farouk Abbas. Now, Ayman Farouk Abbas is an Egyptian heavyweight who's 47 years old. Has a record of 4 wins, 10 defeats, 1 draw. And Ayman Farouk Abbas is known for drawing against the mighty Christopher Lovejoy. He drew to Lovejoy in Cairo, So that goes to show, really goes to show Lovejoy's level, right? But yeah, this is the guy who Ike Ibeabuchi is scheduled to fight on the 7th of December at 51 years old in Nigeria. The comeback is on. The president is back, and he's back in a big way, taking on the man who held the mighty Christopher Lovejoy to a draw. I joke, but it's kind of an interesting story, and Ike Ibeabuchi is certainly one of the biggest what-ifs in boxing, in my opinion, certainly in the heavyweight division. But listen, I'm kind of a sucker for these kind of random events in boxing, where like an old fighter who's been in the wilderness for years comes back. I'm kind of a sucker for it for some reason. Maybe that says a lot about me, but if I can get a copy of it, I'll watch it. No doubt about it. By the way, for those who are interested, Ibeabuchi actually has a YouTube channel. You can find it on YouTube, obviously, but I'll try and remember to link it in this video. Actually speaks quite well. He seems quite articulate, but still seems kind of crazy, I'm not gonna lie. So check him out if you want to. He's uploaded some training footage, a few call-outs, etc. Still looks in good shape, but he doesn't move well, I'll say that. But he's 51. He's 51. Can he beat this guy? We shall see. I'd still take Ike Ibeabuchi to beat Lovejoy, to be fair, who drew to this guy, so we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, interesting story, bizarre story. Should the guy be fighting? Probably not, but it's boxing. And in 2024, Ike Ibeabuchi is coming back. And how fitting that this news came out on election day. The president is back. Anyway, guys, peace out. Have a good one.